Every single one of us has a worldview, which is to say the lens through which you see life. By its very definition, worldview is a framework of ideas and beliefs through which an individual interprets the world and interacts with it. Some of us see the world through the lens of our career, our job, our business. Others of us through the pursuit of money or stuff or prestige. And still others of us view the world through the lens of family or parenthood. Whatever it is for you, we all have a worldview that ultimately dictates then how it is we should then live. In other words, your worldview determines how you approach your life, what you want to accomplish, and it ultimately, it enables you to envision how you see the outcome of your life. I believe that the biggest impact to our worldview is what we believe the purpose of our life to be. And unfortunately, there are many of us who live in a default position, which means that we blindly go through this life, never really thinking about a bigger purpose or meaning, and instead we just react to simply whatever comes our way. And so by default, our worldview has become so myopic that we can't even seem to gain the strength to lift our head up above the daily grind in order to see that there really is something more. So how do we change that? How do we change our worldview? And how do we begin to see what's even possible for our lives moving forward? Well, good morning, y'all. Jen, I was digging on the triangle work there. That was like, it's all on the wrist. So we just finished up this series that I called What is the Least I Can Do and Still Get into Heaven, where we were exploring the last several weeks at what is the minimum threshold for how we can go through this life with the least we can do and still know at the end of the day we end up in the right place. But today we're starting a new series which actually is taking the opposite perspective. And so it's talking about, for the next several weeks, we want to talk about how we can live all out, right? And so we're going to explore this idea by walking through Romans chapter 12. The book of Romans was a book written by the Apostle Paul. It's in the New Testament of the Bible. It was written to the Romans. And it was written as a way to inspire us as to how we can live maxed out in God. So this morning, Romans 12, we're going to start with verses 1 and 2, and this message will kind of just set up the platform for the next several weeks. Therefore, I urge you to offer yourselves as a living sacrifice that is pleasing to God, because of the mercy He has given you. Do not conform any longer to the culture of this world, but instead be transformed by the renewing of your mind and change the way you think. And then you will learn a new way of living, now understanding God's will, which is a better life. So I do this fitness class called Orange Theory. Do I have any Orange Theorist brothers and sisters out there? Anybody? Nobody, really? I feel like I see. Oh, okay, there we go. We got one. So it's been like a really good thing for me. But the premise of the class is that in order to become seriously fit, and to improve our quality of life, then there are moments in the workout where we have to do what they call going all out. And it's the idea that you are to push beyond the limits of what you think you can do. The constraints that you have in your head that you can't go beyond, and that you go beyond them. You blow through them and go beyond what you think are your limits, which means that when you're running on the treadmill, that you're constantly trying to improve. You're going max effort, and at times that means sprinting, beyond what you think you're capable of doing. If you're on the rower, you're going all out in the rowing at an all-out pace. And so inevitably, in the middle of this kind of all-out effort, the coach will yell out, "Let's get uncomfortable." As if I'm not already thinking I'm about to go into cardiac arrest at any moment. I am uncomfortable, brother. But the point is that if we're truly going at something max effort, then we can't help but feel uncomfortable because we're pushing ourselves beyond our limits, that what we think that we can do. And when we do that successfully, we actually can transform our bodies. The same is true of life in general. We have all accepted limits for ourselves where we have come to believe that this is a reasonable way for me to live, right? I don't need to go beyond my limits. I have a good life. And so we accept the boundaries of this culture and we live within the constraints of this world that we know. And this three-dimensional box of this world now becomes the limit of my worldview. But I think what the Apostle Paul is saying in this passage is, let's get uncomfortable. Because we have so blindly followed the culture of this world for so long that we've actually gotten comfortable just doing the daily grind and not really putting any kind of thought or intentionality behind how it is that we're living our lives. We live our lives with blinders on, and we don't think about what's possible, what's lacking. But when we're truly living all out in a Christian lifestyle, we get uncomfortable because we are pushing beyond the cultural norms that constrain us. And so he says, in an effort to live all out, then we need to change the way we think and see beyond even our own limits. And so Paul says, do not conform any longer to the culture of this world. Well, what does that mean? If we were to go back to the original Greek text, which is what the New Testament of the Bible was originally written in, the original word that he uses here for the word conform not only has the idea to conform, but it also has the idea that we identify with something. So in other words, he's saying somewhere down the line, we lost our true identity, who we really are. Up until now, we have identified with the culture of this world. And we have allowed ourselves to be shaped and molded by whatever it is that our culture dictates that we should be. I'll give you a great example. Our eating habits as Americans, right? How we eat and how much we eat is really foreign to other cultures because how we eat is very American. And if you want to change the way you eat in the United States of America and start trying to eat less and eat healthy, it's a really difficult thing to do. I don't know if you've noticed it, because you are now eating counter to the culture that we're living in. And so now when we go to a party or we go out to dinner with friends, we kind of get these weird looks and they go, how could you possibly like kale? It tastes like a bush, right? Or quinoa, really? And so it's difficult to take on a lifestyle that is counter to the way that our culture dictates we should live and start living differently. It's really rare, right? And so the same thing can apply in the way that we're living in every aspect of our lives. The same rule can apply to the way that culture views sexuality or money or how we define success. And we could go right down the line. We live the way that culture dictates we should live, and we love the things that it tells us that we should love, and we have the lifestyle, the desire, the pleasure, because we just want to fit in. We have an image to protect with everybody around us, but what culture is saying, what it's trying to get us to become, is not the person we were created to be. We were created to be something more. And when you think about it, there are two main worldviews that shape most of our culture, and they're in direct contrast with one another. The first worldview is that the universe was just kind of banged out into existence for no apparent reason, no purpose, no order. And it really doesn't matter then what you do with your life, because at the end of the day, it's all very meaningless anyway, because when you die, it's just game over. End of story. So live the way you want to live. But the second worldview, in direct contrast to that, is that you were created by God. You were created with a sense of purpose and meaning for your life. And because of that, I live my life to the fullest in the way that God designed me to live, which is way different than the life that culture continues to try to push upon me. I don't know about you, but it takes me way more faith to believe that everything in this world is accidental and there really is no point to this life than it does for me to believe that there is a God who is behind all of this. And so because of that, I pursue this life. But make no mistake about it. When you choose this life, you are choosing to live counter-culturally. And it's not easy to make that shift. It's like eating a kale salad in the middle of Old Country Buffet. You stand out like a sore thumb. But that's what the Apostle Paul is saying here when he says, do not conform any longer to the culture of this world, but instead be transformed by the renewing of your mind and change the way you think. Paul's saying, if you want a better life, then in order to do that, we're going to need to make some changes. And not just small changes, they have to be transformational, all-out changes. And the word that he uses here from the original Greek has the idea to change yourself from the inside out completely. And you can see from this word, this is where we derive our word metamorphosis, which has the idea of a complete and utter transformation. It's caterpillar to butterfly thing, right? It changes the very essence of who we are and what makes our life tick. That we are no longer limited by what culture dictates is who we should be or how we should act or what we should be striving for in order to be successful in the eyes of the world. But instead now, it's time to move beyond the box of this culture and live all out in God, to explode beyond those boundaries. And I think that that's exactly the point that Jesus is making when he says in Luke chapter 9, he says, if any of you want to follow me, then you have to deny yourself. Take up your cross daily and follow me. For what good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose their very self? It's interesting when you look at the phrase in verse 23 when Jesus says that we are to deny ourselves. In the original Greek text, it can be translated, stop acting like yourself. Which is really to say, stop acting like who you're not. Just because our culture tells you this is who you are by cultural norms, it doesn't mean that that's who you are really. Who you are really is who God created us to be. And so then the question becomes, are we able to teach an old dog new tricks? And now in the middle of our lives, after we've spent our entire life taking all of our cues from the world that has molded us and shaped us into our ideologies, are we now able to disrupt ourselves to the point of becoming something different? Can we truly ever become the person that God created us to become? That word disruption means to interrupt or to throw something into a state of disorder in an effort to prevent normal and expected functioning. And in this case, we're talking about your life. And we want you to disrupt you in an effort to prevent you from normal or expected functioning. In other words, Stop going through the motions of how you've always done things and learn a new way of life that allows you to get freed up from the mindless daily grind. I mean, we can get so checked out and mindlessly go through our days, which then become years, which then become decades, and eventually we look up from behind the wheel of our lives and we go, how did I even get here? We have to be able to disrupt ourselves while we still can. While we still have the courage to be something different. The more we can disrupt ourselves, the more we can transform ourselves, and the closer we can get to becoming our true, authentic self. And when that happens, I can now create a new reality for my future. Because I have now successfully changed my worldview. I have transformed it, and it's now causing me to begin to see myself differently, and I have great clarity about what it is that's driving me forward. And I can finally see beyond the horizon of this life and see beyond that and understand that I was created for something so much more than just this world. Look, I have to tell you that the area of my life that this is really tough for me is in the area of business. Because I am very wired to be success-driven at everything I do. And I can easily get caught up in the grind of doing more deals and making more money and building a more successful business. And I have to fight through that constantly, internally, to see what's really important, because it's very easy for me to get caught up in it and to lose perspective. And so I finally just started a couple years ago just stopping when I'm feeling something, and I ask myself, okay, what is this failure that I'm experiencing? Or what is this success? What is it that has me so stressed out or jazzed up? At the end of the day, what does that matter? What lasting value does it have? Asking those questions begin to change my entire outlook, because most of the time, what I get so uptight about isn't going to amount to a hill of beans when I'm dead and gone. But it could sure as heck get me all stressed out today. The issue is that when I begin to do that, when I begin to live authentically and it bleeds into my business life, I am now living counter to the rest of business culture. As everyone is seeking to make the last penny that they can make and to get as much power as they can and more pleasure and more self-centeredness, I'm striving to find purpose and mission in everything I do. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not a pious person. So I'm not sitting up here telling you that I'm not trying to build a profitable business or to make money. I hate losing money, and I love doing deals. So I'm not saying it. But what I am saying is that you can do business with integrity and not do anything at the expense of what I'm really seeking in this life, which is fulfillment, where I can use my position that I have created in the business world to make a difference in the rest of the world best I can. I've been in a very stressful negotiation over the last 6 months with this guy, and he has just complicated the heck out of this deal and just drove me nuts. And this last Friday at 4 p.m., because I said it had to be done by this last Friday, so of course 4 p.m. rolls around, and we finally bring it to a conclusion and I get the deal done. But at the end of the negotiation, he stops and he says, Darren, I just want you to know, the only reason why I have hung in there this long with you is because you have a reputation in the business world of being a good guy. And he said, you have conducted yourself differently than I have seen, with integrity, and throughout this entire process, you have been a man of your word. And he said, it's very rare in our world. And so I'm happy to do this deal. I'm happy that we got this deal done together. But that really took me back. And I was really, really grateful that I had shown restraint all those times when I wanted to reach through the phone and choke him or to cuss him out. It was a lot of work, right? To show up differently and to be different in that context in a world where there's just like sharks trying to like kill each other. It's really difficult. But that conversation really inspired me to help me to understand that, authenticity in my life as a Christian doesn't just apply when I'm at church or in my family. It happens every day when I'm in the boardroom. And I think that what Paul is doing in Romans 12 at the end of verse 2 when he says, then you will learn a new way of life, right? Where you are understanding God's will, which is a better way of life. If we believe that we were created by God, if we believe that this world was created by God, then how could we not believe that what he lays out for his life, for our lives, is not a better life, as it's designed by the Creator? Paul isn't calling us to live life as usual. He's calling us to live counterculturally, to be abnormal in a sea of normality, to live an extraordinary life when it's all about maintaining the status quo. He's calling us to live differently. And I think if I were to sum it up, Paul is simply saying here that, look, if we achieve becoming successful in the eyes of the world, at the end of the day, what do I have? When they put me, who was successful in this life, in the ground, what does it matter? Because in that moment, I'm done. I had a good run, but now it's game over. Jesus said, what good is it if you gain the entire world and yet you lose your very self? What if we can manage to disrupt ourselves while there is still time and create a transformational change where we now walk through this life with a different worldview? One that now blows through the limits of the constraints of this world. Paul says, now the real you, your real self, the person God created you to be, now you can be freed up to live all out and experience the life as God designed it to be lived, which is a way better life. And suddenly you'll find the pressure's off, right? Because I don't have to keep trying to build up my image and always try to make myself look good and live up to the standards that this culture dictates. Now I can be freed up to be myself, to be my authentic self, which is honestly a pretty messed up person who has an amazing capacity to screw up my life and yet still be saved by the grace of God because of the mercy that I've been given, that allows me to walk through this life humbly. And now, for the first time in a long time, I feel a peace and a contentment in my life that I've never known before. Can you find the courage to disrupt your old way of life and create a new reality for your future, where we walk through the rest of our lives and we are spiritually awake and alive, and we have this new worldview that drives us forward into limitless possibilities, to go beyond the realms of this world. And we're freed up to walk through the rest of our lives passionately, fearlessly. Brilliant.